coming together to find solutions.
We are going to do something about it.
Their stories are our stories.
Welcome to Eye on America.
Stream on the free CBS News app, Mondays at 8 p.m.
If it's important to our nation,
Madam Speaker, I want to talk to you, of course, about abortion.
it's on Face the Nation.
How much money is it that you think you need to go ask Congress for?
The why behind the biggest stories.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
Democrats, since they took the majority, has been addicted to spending, and that's going to stop.
We also have obligations to seniors who count on Social Security, our military that expects pay.
I'm running for President of the United States of America.
Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. President Biden and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy are set to meet soon about the debt ceiling. We'll have more on that in a moment. But first, the 2024 Republican presidential field is growing. South Carolina Senator Tim Scott kicked off his campaign today in his home state, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is expected to jump into the race as soon as Wednesday. Meanwhile, as we mentioned, time is running out for Washington to resolve the debt ceiling standoff. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen reaffirmed in a letter to Congress today that the U.S. could default on its debt as soon as June 1st. President Biden and McCarthy are meeting less than 2 weeks before that deadline. We'll have more on that soon. For now, we have Ed O'Keefe and Nicole Killian joining us now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent, and Nicole is CBS News congressional correspondent joining us from Capitol Hill. And Nicole, that's where we'll start today because there's been a lot of back and forth, a lot of talks over the weekend. We've seen leaders come out, negotiators come out. I know you had a opportunity to get some reaction from Kevin McCarthy. Essentially, at this point, with McCarthy and Biden set to meet, where do things stand?
Well, you know, I asked Speaker McCarthy what his message is to President Biden as they meet this evening, and he said that it really is pretty simple and something that he has been urging the president since February, that we can't spend more than we did last year. So really, the leader is trying to toe the line when it comes to the issue of spending. That is why, of course, with the Republican bill that passed the House last month, we saw that bill cut spending by $4.8 trillion. Now, we know the White House won't go for that much, but certainly the speaker believes that Democrats in the White House need to rein in spending. So that really is the chief argument going into this meeting. And I also asked the speaker more specifically, of course, now we have that warning letter from the Treasury Secretary, once again, reaffirming this June 1st X date. And I asked him if he believes that date is firm. Do you think there's wiggle room on that June 1st date?
Look, that's up to Janet Yellen. That's probably, they decide when that date is. The president may have more information on that, but she's been very clear that June 1st, that's why we took action all the way back in April, even before she said it was June 1st. We thought it was in July. We don't want to be in this last moment. I think that's a terrible way to govern.
So in terms of both the speaker and the White House, they do see this June 1st deadline as a hard deadline for the most part, although the speaker acknowledged that even if they cut a deal, and he said a deal does need to be done this week, they still need time to craft that legislation, to write it, to give members a chance to read it. So that really will push up against that June 1st date.
And Ed, the president just returned from Japan over the weekend. He cut his trip early. He was supposed to go to Australia, cut his trip early so that he could work on these negotiations. Nicole mentioned that letter from Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. It seems like she is continuing to warn that this is the real deal. This is the deadline. What was in that letter that she sent this afternoon? And how's the White House seeing this ahead of this meeting this evening?
Well, the White House, in coordination with the Treasury Department, distributing that letter just 45 minutes before the meeting begins, as if to reinforce the real-world consequences. This is something we've been anticipating all day, and the timing is notable that it comes just before they begin to meet, as if to reinforce to the Speaker it's time to cut a deal. It says in part that it's now highly likely the Treasury will no longer be able to satisfy all of the government's obligations if Congress hasn't acted to raise or suspend the debt limit by early June and potentially as early as June 1. She says later, we've already seen Treasury's borrowing costs increase substantially for securities maturing in early June. If Congress fails to increase the debt limit, it would cause severe hardship to American families, harm our global leadership position, and raise questions about our ability to defend our national security interests. So, if anything, she's reinforcing what she warned about last week, where she signaled it was June 1. Now she's saying at least some obligations might be able to get paid, but not all, starting on June 1. But look, if you're somebody who went to sleep last week when the president went to Japan and is just waking up and asking the question, what's happened with the debt limit? The answer is nothing, really. The negotiators met through the weekend. They continue to be at loggerheads, and it turns out that another meeting of the principals is what's needed to get this thing moving forward. And while both sides have been pretty clear on their positions, the White House not wanting to cut spending as significantly as House Republicans saying that there has to be less spending than there was last time, the White House then asking in turn, okay, does that mean you want to cut all the domestic non-defense spending as you are proposing to increase the Pentagon's budget? If so, are you prepared then to face the political pain of ads saying that you want to cut jobs and funding for veterans' health care, for hospitals, for cops, for border security, for health care for millions of Americans? If so, Democrats are ready to have that fight. And yet at the same time, they're fearful that the president may be about to negotiate away sacrosanct bedrock principles for the party, like new work requirements on social safety net programs, or perhaps permitting reform that doesn't do exactly what Democrats would like it to do, but instead focuses more on sort of older energy industry projects as opposed to the newer ones that have been authorized by the infrastructure bill that was passed 2 years ago. So Washington waits and sees what happens in this meeting. Remember, the Speaker had offered to meet with the president earlier today and then told him yesterday as he was leaving Japan, oh, wait, maybe let's wait till the afternoon so you can get some rest. It was unclear if he was being cute there and calling out the president's age, or if he really did need a few hours to get things together. Of course, he was meeting today with his negotiating team, who was then up on Capitol Hill, and we'll see later what both the Speaker and the president have to say after the meeting.
Yeah, and speaking of those meetings, I mean, we've been seeing lawmakers come out into the hallways and try to give updates. Patrick McHenry, who, of course, is key to these negotiations, spoke with reporters. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
I am concerned about making sure we can have a deal that can pass the House, the Senate, and be signed by the president. It's a complicated piece of math. It is.
Of course, he's the chairman of the Financial Services Committee. I mean, Nicole, a complicated piece of math. I mean, that pretty much is it. But, you know, judging from that kind of comment and given the deadline, it doesn't really feel like Republicans are optimistic today. Do you anticipate that'll change?
Well, I think, again, we kind of have to wait and see what comes out of the meeting with Speaker McCarthy and President Biden. Certainly a lot riding on that. You know, one thing that Congressman McCarthy said is that he does feel that things are at a very sensitive point right now. And the Speaker said that he does agree with that viewpoint. I mean, again, we're talking about 10 days or so that they have to strike some type of deal. You know, one interesting thing that the Speaker did say is he does feel that whatever agreement, if they reach an agreement, can come out of this. He feels relatively confident that he can get a majority of his conference on board. And he also suggested that this would need bipartisan support. Of course, that is something that the White House is pushing. Democrats are pushing. They say you can't do a deal without having some type of bipartisan buy-in. And the Speaker did acknowledge that, look, if you strike a deal with the president, Democrats typically vote for it, so do Republicans. So I do think, you know, the Speaker is very cognizant that he is going to need a broad support on any kind of agreement that ultimately emerges.
All right, and we'll see as the two leaders are set to meet just moments from now. We will keep everyone updated. Ed O'Keefe and Nicole Killian, thank you for your reporting. And as we said, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are trying to get this resolution to the debt ceiling. We'll talk to Republican Congressman David Joyce, who joins us next. You're streaming America Decides.
If
It's important to our nation.
I wonder how you think about where America is at this moment.
It's on Face the Nation.
Can there be stability if Vladimir Putin remains in power?
Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan on CBS.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education. Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
I always tell people that Twitter would not be Twitter without Black Twitter. It's just us being in fellowship with each other.
And it becomes a conversation you don't want to be left out of.
People really started to recognize the power of activism on Twitter.
Based on that one tweet, the hashtag #OscarSoWhite was trending around the world.
If anything has really powered Black Twitter, it's been humor.
If your food ain't right, we're going to tell you about that, too.
We tend to create change, create culture and cool.
That's how movements happen on Black Twitter and go beyond more than that.
Black Twitter, the Twitterverse that changed a generation. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News. An original documentary from CBS reports.
The carnage in our nation's schools has become painfully repetitive.
Now one more child!
School shootings have parents fighting mad.
I promised my daughter I was going to fight. It was going to keep on happening.
And teachers taking lessons in how to fight back.
This is an exercise.
We approach it as it's you or them.
It shouldn't have to be your teacher's job to protect your life.
But will the battle over gun control,
people are afraid that they're going to lose their gun rights altogether,
be the hardest lesson of all?
The exercise, you're having to shoot at an adult. Are you prepared to have to kill one of your students?
Guns in the Classroom, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Everybody wakes up in the morning and they are pelted with alerts that frighten them, news that agitates them. With this show, we have the time to explain what's going on. Here's a deeper understanding of what's happening.
Primetime with John Dickerson. Stream on the free CBS News app. When weather turns extreme.
The threat of severe weather and dangerous tornadoes is expected to last.
CBS News and the Weather Channel bring you virtual weather technology so advanced, so real.
Let's bring in our partners at the Weather Channel.
Now 6 feet of water, imagine that. Cars that can act like battery lamps.
These hyper-realistic simulations show you what the weather will look and feel like before it happens.
Feel the forecast, streaming on CBS News.
I think people are of goodwill. I don't think there's any interest in us delaying these tough conversations. And so we want this to be productive. We want this to be a productive week.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was House Financial Services Committee Chairman Patrick McHenry on those debt limit negotiations. We're now less than 2 weeks away from the Treasury's default deadline. So for more on this, let's talk to Republican Congressman David Joyce, who joins us now from Capitol Hill. He represents Ohio's 14th District and is a member of the House Appropriations Committee. Congressman, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So you heard Patrick McHenry here. Do you agree that both sides are working in good faith on this debt limit?
Yes, thanks for having me, Caitlin. I do believe that we are working in good faith, and we're trying to get to something that will have a consensus of, for certain, 218 Republicans, but also I think we'll be able to get something where even some Democrats might come over, and that's the way D.C. should work.
Congressman, you mentioned that. I mean, the idea of having Democrats on board, could you imagine a scenario in which Kevin McCarthy has to cut a deal that requires Democratic support, or do you think he needs something that gets the majority of Republicans?
Well, I think at the end of the day, you're trying to craft something that's the 218 Republicans will get on board with. But again, hopefully it's such a good bill that others will join as well and realize this is in the best interest of our country to put these requirements in place and to lift the debt ceiling and move forward.
I know you were supportive of Kevin McCarthy when he was running for Speaker. How would you assess how he's been navigating this challenge?
Yeah, Kevin's done a wonderful job as a Speaker to be able to sit down and put all variety of people with different viewpoints into a room and let the conversation go where it may, and building a consensus to try to get something that everybody can go back to their respectful groups and constituents and talk about what we're doing and why we're trying to do these things now and move the country forward. We can't continue on the road we're on with the spending. We have to start doing something about containing the spending, because while we're receiving record revenues, we're also continuing to spend at record rates. And the inflation at home has not been cured for anybody in my district.
Can we talk about some of the sticking points in this legislation? The House obviously passed a bill. Is there anything in there that you would be willing to give up for the sake of a broader negotiation?
Well, I think it's premature to talk about giving anything up because we're the only game in town. We passed the bill. The Senate's done nothing. And the president for 97 days has sat on his hands. And so we've talked about getting to this point. Everybody knew this was going to be a date set certain at some point. Treasury Secretary Yellen has moved that date up, obviously, to June 1st. But remember, before we passed this bill, it was mid-July. It was going to be August. Now it's moved up. Okay, so we stand ready, willing, and able to put together something that will serve the best interests of the people we represent. And we're waiting for the Senate and we're waiting for the president. But I think in this case, it's specifically the president to start talking realistic numbers with Kevin, the Speaker, so we could start putting together a bill that works.
And to that point about that House-passed bill, I mean, some Republicans, including those from the Freedom Caucus, are demanding that these debt ceiling negotiations pause until the Senate actually passes the Republican bill. I mean, that doesn't seem realistic. What do you say to them?
No, it's not realistic because, as we all know, the Senate is where good ideas and bills go to die. We're in a position where we put together something that is actually worthwhile, and we would hope that the Senator Schumer and his group would entertain it, but they haven't. But I think it's been focused from the get-go that these discussions are between the president and Speaker McCarthy, and that's what's going to take place in a few minutes, and hopefully become some realistic top-line numbers in which we can continue to appropriate and move the country forward.
And there's been some talk of using the 14th Amendment, bypassing Congress altogether. What would you make of that kind of scenario?
I don't think it's realistic at this point in time because obviously you'll be subject to legal challenges. And as we all know, the market doesn't like legal challenges or uncertainty. The market likes certainty, and we need to keep the market focused on doing the things that they need to do instead of worrying about whether or not the 14th Amendment will be held to be constitutional and used in this manner. I think it's more important that as President Biden has been down this road before, as a senator and as a vice president, and now as a president. Ball's in his court. He knows that we're staying here ready, willing, and able to work. Let's start with realistic numbers and get moving.
Congressman, I want to switch gears a little bit because you are on the Ethics Committee. You are chairing a special referral, essentially, an investigation into George Santos. You voted to refer this Democratic-sponsored resolution that would want to expel Santos. That was referred to your committee. Some of your Republican colleagues voted present. Why did you vote the way that you did? And also, I know that you can't explain kind of the details of the investigation so far, but if you could give us kind of a wider parameters of where things stand in that committee.
Well, first off, I've always voted present when the vote has been about the subject matter in which the committee was going to be entertaining. In this case, if there was just a motion to expel, I'd have voted present for that too, because that would go to the subject matter. On this, it was, for whatever reason, a re-referral to the Ethics Committee, which is presently entertaining something, and we'll continue to do our job and let the Department of Justice do theirs.
And to that note, I mean, typically the Ethics Committee pauses on their investigations if the DOJ picks it up. That's not the case here. Can you explain why that is? Do you have more on your plate in terms of the scope of the investigation than the Justice Department does?
Well, the Justice Department in this case moved fairly quickly, but I will bet you that there'll be a superseding indictment at some point in the future, while they move forward on their case. But for our case, justice takes time. I didn't put any time limits on the investigation, and a bifurcated hearing in which DOJ will handle their matters and ethics will handle their matters that fall within their purview is consistent with what we've done all along. A lot of times the allegations of which DOJ would take it on would be purely criminal. And members have sat in session and been part of this. They've been stripped of their committees after they're indicted, but they've still been allowed to the due process of sitting here as a member until they're finally either plead guilty or found guilty, and then they're removed from Congress.
All right, we will keep an eye on that investigation as well as these debt limit negotiations. That one has a tighter deadline than yours does. Congressman David Joyce, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Caitlin.
And coming up, Senator Tim Scott's formal presidential campaign announcement also brought a key early endorsement. We're going to be taking a closer look at this crowded field of Republicans vying to take back the White House. We're streaming America Decides.
An original documentary from CBS reports. Controversial Congressman George Santos.
Why won't you answer our questions?
How did he manage to get elected?
Thank you very much, and God bless you, and God bless the USA.
George Santos' campaign was a campaign of deceit, lies, fabrication.
And who is he, really?
I knew him as Anthony DeVolder from Queens.
Really, who he is, he's a fraud.
I compare him to the Tinder swindler.
From people who know him, the truth, the facts, the lies.
He would say that he was worth $100 million.
It's an incredibly cynical episode in American politics, beyond satire.
Had you ever seen anything like this?
No, and I hope I never see it again.
Campaign of Deceit, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
She dazzled on the court and off the court as a businesswoman.
Thank you for joining us on Person to Person. Tennis superstar and entrepreneur, Serena Williams.
An original CBS Reports documentary.
I asked my students, what are we going to do about racism in the United States?
The backlash over teaching about racism in American schools.
I don't think it has any place in the classroom.
We can either pretend and say, no, we're not racist and we're all great people, or we can actually start to do the really, really hard work of addressing it.
How did you lose your job?
I made the statement that white privilege is a fact.
Is it helping diversity and inclusion?
When you bring in different people's stories and experience, it enriches education.
If you don't talk about something, it doesn't go away.
Or driving us further apart?
What schools are doing to our children in the name of anti-racism is in fact teaching them racism.
The intention is to put us in this war against each other.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now. An original CBS Reports documentary.
I was entitled to equal pay for equal work under the law.
Does the Supreme Court's power need to be checked?
9 Supreme Court justices, 5 of them said no, she's not entitled. That's not right.
Calls to fix the court tend to go along with the politics of the moment.
Republican-appointed justices have all tended to go in one direction, with the Democratic-appointed justices tending to go in another.
Even though it's only 9 justices, it takes 5 of them to make the law of the land.
Does it have political impact? True. Political intent? Probably not true.
If the American people don't trust the judgment of their court, that's a real problem for our democracy.
An original CBS Reports documentary, streaming now.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team. I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
I'm announcing today that I'm running for president of the United States of America.
And that's South Carolina Senator Tim Scott, who officially is now running for president. He joins a crowded field of Republicans running for president also, a growing field, I should say, which may become even more crowded in the coming days. CBS News chief election and campaign correspondent Robert Costa joins me now from North Charleston, South Carolina. Bob, good to see you out on the campaign trail. So, obviously Donald Trump has been leading the field in poll after poll, but that doesn't appear to be deterring others from getting into the race. We see that with Scott today. I know you were at his campaign launch earlier today. What is his pitch? Where does he see himself fitting in this field?
Caitlin, you've covered Senator Scott as well as anyone in the country, and let's have a little conversation maybe. I mean, it seems like Senator Scott in his speech today was definitely positioning himself as a traditional conservative who has conservative views on issues like abortion, on the economy, but he's trying not to take that shot at former President Trump politically. He really wants to carve his own space in the Republican Party, but as you've covered, many challenges in the road ahead.
Yeah, Bob, it's really interesting that you say that because it seems like, he doesn't want to go after Trump directly, but it seems like the essence of his campaign is designed as a contrast to Trump, this kind of optimistic vision for the future, this positivity campaign, and not willing or wanting to really go after his rivals. Is that kind of how the campaign is fashioning itself, or do we expect the gloves to come off?
It's also interesting, Caitlin, that they're fashioning themselves as the quiet favorite of the Republican establishment. Let's listen to Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the #2 Senate Republican who showed up here in North Charleston earlier today.
I think people are anxious for a positive, hopeful, aspirational candidate. I hope there's a really wide lane for him out there, and I think he draws on the very best of the past. He's got a heritage that goes back to the kind of the Reagan years, but he also is somebody who's very much about the future, and you heard him talk about that today, and I think that's what the American people want to hear, and that is, what are you going to do for the future of this country, and restore that optimism, that hope, that positive voice that I think we've been lacking in our politics today.
So I was watching Senator Thune, Caitlin. He was in the rafters at the Scott event. Larry Ellison, the billionaire founder of Oracle, was there. And behind Larry Ellison was former governor of South Carolina, Mark Sanford. They were all standing there, kind of their arms folded, listening to Senator Scott. And in him, they see someone who could be their standard bearer, someone who could represent the views of the Wall Street Journal editorial page, the business community, social conservatives. But they're trying to see, does he have the energy, the momentum, the money to break through? For now, they're feeling pretty good, but it's a long road ahead.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear that call out of Larry Ellison. I mean, he is going to be donating a lot of money, already has, to Scott's endeavors. You had this conversation with Thune. I mean, this is just really important to point out that this is the #2 in leadership, as you mentioned. What else did Thune tell you, and what does it say about this endorsement? I mean, do we expect others to follow suit here, or is Thune kind of going out on his own? He's #2 to Mitch McConnell.
Leader McConnell is someone who has not pulled his punches when it comes to former President Trump. Senator Thune, someone who has a lot of friends in the Senate Republican Conference who are looking for an alternative to Trump. And they see in Senator Scott a colleague, but they also see an option. They want an option at this stage. And some of them are not totally comfortable with Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is expected to get into the race later this week, at least in terms of filing his candidacy. They see in DeSantis the same kind of populism that turns them a bit off with former President Trump. And DeSantis, his battles with Disney have also not made him a favorite with many Senate Republicans. So Senator Scott harkens back to the Tea Party era, that more strident conservatism, fiscal conservatism that really speaks the language of so many who are in Congress and have been congressional Republicans for a long time.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Bob, to that point, too, that Scott's the only senator running. Usually Republicans try to run from outside Washington. He told us last month that he actually thinks it's an asset that he has, worked on deals and negotiations and legislation. So we'll see kind of how the public or the voters actually respond. But you mentioned DeSantis. We know that Trump has been eyeing DeSantis as his chief rival. He's obviously, as you mentioned, expected to get into the race later this week. But how has Trump been reacting to Scott's presidential bid?
He's been holding off. You saw his Truth Social post earlier today. He's not taking on Scott in any way. He's saying Scott's not a target. Scott's not a threat. He is the only senator running, as you noted. It's kind of interesting historically because most U.S. senators, having covered them for a long time. You and I have been there in the hallways. Most of them look in the mirror every day, and they seem to see a future president. And so it's often that a lot of senators jump in, a lot of governors jump in, just Senator Scott this time around. But we'll have to see how this plays out. Senator Scott is someone who has a lot of respect among power players in Washington, in New York, on Wall Street, but he's still not really known by the country. So that $15 million, $20 million from Larry Ellison, that's going to be really helpful in this initial spate of advertising to get Scott's name out there to see if he can catch fire in Iowa, in New Hampshire.
And it looks like he is heading out on the campaign trail to Iowa and New Hampshire very soon as well. And I know you will be covering them all. Bob Costa, good to see you. Thank you so much for your reporting. And that does it for us today. You can stream America Decides Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.
It's a history-making meeting. 4 extraordinary women who are all 4-star generals and admirals.
How did you deal with being discriminated against?
I just worked harder.
The future of an ever-evolving U.S. military when we go